My father, the celebrated General Harrison Knox, didn't just banish me from my own brother's party. He pushed an ice-cold glass into my hand and whispered, "The porch is for disappointments." What he and all his decorated guests didn't know is that this disappointment is the one person the Pentagon now fears most. This is my story. My name is Taylor Knox, and I am 32 years old. For the last 3 hours, I've been driving through the dense pine forests of North Carolina, heading toward a place I once called home, Fayetteville. The air that rolled through my open window was thick, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a smell that used to mean safety. Today, it felt like a warning. As I pulled my sedan onto their street, the scent changed. It was instantly, powerfully familiar. The smoky, sweet perfume of slow-cooked pork from a charcoal grill. The party for my brother was already in full swing. Through the manicured hedges, I could see the backyard of my parents' house, a sprawling brick colonial teeming with life. Laughter, sharp and loud, punctuated the low hum of conversation. It was the sound of a world I no longer belonged to. I took a deep breath, my heart a tight knot in my chest. Just be invisible, get through it. Say hello, congratulate Caleb, and leave. It was a mantra I'd repeated for the entire drive. I came out of a sense of duty, or maybe something more foolish. A tiny, stubborn sliver of hope that this time it might be different. Stepping inside was like walking into another dimension. The air conditioning was a cool shock, and the house was filled with the cheerful cacophony of celebration. Officers in their crisp army dress uniforms stood in confident circles, their wives beside them in tasteful summer dresses. They were all orbiting one person, the gravitational center of this universe, my younger brother, Captain Caleb Knox, the golden son of General Harrison Knox. He was laughing, his teeth a flash of white, his shoulders broad and strong. He was everything I was supposed to be. I moved along the edges of the room like a ghost, my movements practiced and quiet. I saw my mother, a vision of Southern grace, refilling a bowl of punch, her smile never faltering. Her eyes swept the room and passed right over me, not out of cruelty, but because she simply wasn't looking for me. My goal was the drink station. I just wanted a glass of sweet tea, something cold to hold on to. As I reached for the large glass pitcher, beaded with condensation, my Aunt Margaret saw me. For a split second, her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a flash of raw, undeniable pity. She immediately turned away. That glance said everything. In this house, my presence wasn't a joy. It was an inconvenience to be managed. The call for dinner came, a soft wave of movement guiding everyone toward the back of the house, where long tables had been set up under the sprawling oak tree, decorated with starched white tablecloths and patriotic centerpieces. I lingered by the doorway, knowing there was no place card with my name on it. That's when I felt him. I didn't need to see him. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. My father, General Harrison Knox. He moved with an unshakable authority that commanded respect in war rooms and on parade grounds. He stopped beside me, his polished black shoes gleaming. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a warm, affectionate touch. It was the firm, calloused hand of a commander. A guiding pressure that was both gentle and absolute. He steered me without a word away from the dining tables and toward the sliding glass door that led to the back porch. When we reached the threshold, he leaned in, his face close to my ear. His voice was a low, cold whisper, a frequency meant only for me. "Caleb worked hard for this night," he murmured, his breath smelling faintly of bourbon. "Don't let your shadow fall on it. Your place is out there." Then, just as quickly, he was gone. He turned, his posture straightening, his face reforming into the mask of the perfect, genial host. He left me standing there, frozen, his words echoing in the silent space he had created. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order of exile. The metal of the folding chair was cold and unyielding against my legs. It was the only piece of furniture on the porch, set beside the hulking, silent gas grill. The gentle hiss from the propane tank was my only companion. From here, I had a perfect panoramic view of the party through the large glass door. It was like watching a silent film of a life I was supposed to have. I saw my father raise his glass, his voice a muffled but resonant boom. I could read his lips form the words in my mind. He was toasting Caleb, the son who continues the Knox legacy with honor and distinction. A chorus of cheers and applause followed. My mother beamed, her eyes shining with pride. And then the screen of a large projector on the lawn flickered to life. For a wild, stupid moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was a slideshow. Maybe there would be a picture of us as kids, a forgotten moment of shared childhood. But it wasn't a slideshow. It was a single, professionally taken photograph. A new family portrait. There were 3 people in it, standing in front of this very house, wreathed in Christmas lights. General Harrison Knox, his wife beside him, and their son, Captain Caleb Knox. The 3 of them smiling, perfect. The picture had been taken last Christmas, months after I had been home for a brief, tense visit. They hadn't just forgotten to include me. They had actively, deliberately waited until I was gone to create this new official history. An updated record of the family with the defective part removed. I sat there, the ice in my sweet tea now completely melted, the glass lukewarm in my numb hand. The laughter from the party sounded distant, alien. They had erased me. In the warm, bright circle of my family's love, I didn't exist. I stared through the glass, my eyes finding my father's face. He was laughing at something a fellow officer had said, his head thrown back. His eyes, even from this distance, looked cold. That look, that cold, dismissive gaze. I'd seen it once before, 8 years ago, in a room that smelled of mahogany and betrayal. How does a life-saving decision become the sin that ruins your life? The answer to that question wasn't found on a battlefield, but in my father's office 8 years ago. The memory is so vivid, it's a scar on my mind. It was night in the forests surrounding West Point. A cold, relentless rain was falling, turning the familiar training grounds into a treacherous landscape of mud and shadow. We were cadets, engaged in a night navigation exercise, a final test of our land warfare skills before graduation. I was at Point, leading my squad. The topographical map we'd been issued was old, the paper soft and worn at the creases, but I trusted my compass, I trusted my training, I trusted the unshakable sense of direction that had always been my strength. We moved in silence, the only sounds the squelch of our boots in the mud and the steady drumming of rain on our helmets. Then, a prickle of unease, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weather. Something was wrong. I stopped, raising a hand to halt the squad, and stared down at the map under the faint red glow of my penlight. A creek that should have been on our left was on our right. A ridgeline that was marked as a gradual slope was in reality a steep, rocky incline. The map was dangerously inaccurate. My voice was low but clear over the radio handset. "Command, this is Knox. halting movement to re-verify position, discrepancy between map and terrain. The response from our supervising officer, Lieutenant Miller, was immediate and dismissive. Negative, Cadet Knox. Trust your instruments. Proceed with the objective. Do not delay the formation. I hesitated. An order was an order, but the feeling of wrongness was overwhelming, a physical weight in my gut. I looked up from the map, peering into the rain-swept darkness ahead, and I saw it, a faint, intermittent flicker of light where there should have been nothing but trees. My blood ran cold. I knew what that was. It was the warning light for a live fire range, another unit's training area. We were walking directly into their line of fire. Get down! The words tore from my throat, raw and primal. I didn't wait for them to obey. I launched myself forward, shoving the cadet in front of me, a kid named Peterson, to the ground. I threw my body over his, pulling him flat against the slick, wet earth. A split second later, the air above us ripped apart with the sound of automatic weapon fire. A burst of tracer rounds, brilliant green streaks in the night, sliced through the space where our heads had been moments before. We were pinned down, the scent of cordite mixing with the smell of wet soil, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had disobeyed a direct order, and I had just saved 3 lives. There was no formal court-martial, no board of inquiry. There was only the suffocating silence of my father's office at West Point. The room smelled of old leather, mahogany, and lemon-scented furniture polish. It was the smell of power and tradition. 3 people were present. My father, General Harrison Knox, seated behind his immense desk, Lieutenant Miller, standing rigidly at attention, and me, standing in the center of the room, my uniform still damp. Miller, his face pale but his voice steady with a rehearsed confidence, presented his version of events. He painted a picture of a cadet who had panicked, who had become disoriented in the poor weather conditions. He described my warning as a hysterical outburst and my actions as reckless behavior that endangered the entire squad. He lied calmly, professionally, and without a flicker of hesitation. Throughout the entire recitation, my father did not look at me, not once. His gaze was fixed on the official report Miller had placed on his desk, a neatly typed document filled with damning falsehoods. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't question a single word of Miller's account. His silence was a physical thing, an anvil pressing down on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. It was more terrifying than any accusation, more final than any verdict. His silence meant he had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. He had chosen the system. He had chosen to protect the reputation of a commissioned officer over the truth from his own daughter. When Miller finished, the silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was even, devoid of any emotion, the calm, measured tone of a man making a strategic decision. "The issue here is not who you saved, Taylor," he said, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. "The issue is that you made a commanding officer look weak. You broke the chain of command." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished surface of the desk. A voluntary withdrawal form. Beside it, he placed a heavy black fountain pen. "Sign it," he said. "Cite personal reasons. It will be cleaner for everyone, for the academy, and for this family." Tears I had refused to shed in the forest now burned my eyes. My voice was a choked whisper. "What about the truth, Dad?" For the first time in the entire meeting, his expression changed. His eyes, the same ones I had inherited, turned to ice. The warmth of a father was gone, replaced by the cold calculus of a general. The truth, he said slowly, each word a carefully placed stone, is what the person in authority decides it is. And right now you have no authority. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize your truth, the very facts of what happened, simply don't matter to the people who hold power over you? He pushed the pen closer to me. Sign the paper for the honor of this family. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt impossible. It was a weapon aimed at my own future. I looked at my father, searching for a flicker of doubt, a trace of love, a sign that he was being forced into this. I found nothing, only the unyielding resolve of a man protecting his legacy. I signed my name. The ink bled onto the page, a final dark stain on my dream. With that single stroke, I wasn't just leaving West Point. I was signing the death warrant for my own soul. My signature condemned me. They thought they had erased me, buried me under the weight of their lies. But they didn't know one thing. When you have nothing left to lose, you can become anyone. And I chose to become a ghost. For 3 weeks after West Point, the world had no grand purpose for me. My new reality was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at a Waffle House off a lonely highway exit outside of Richmond, Virginia. The air, thick with the smell of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee, clung to my clothes and hair. My life was measured in coffee refills and orders of scattered, smothered, and covered hash browns. I spent my nights wiping down sticky syrup from the laminate countertops, my reflection a pale, hollowed-out version of the woman I used to be. The shame was a constant, low-grade fever. This was the bottom. One night, as I was mopping the checkered floor, my cheap burner phone vibrated in my pocket. A blocked number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Knox?" a woman's voice asked. It was calm, level, and devoid of any emotion. "Who is this?" I replied, my voice raspy from disuse. She ignored my question. "Be at this address tomorrow at 1400 hours. Come alone." She gave me an address in Arlington and hung up. The next day, I took a Greyhound bus, my meager belongings in a single backpack. The address led to a bland, nondescript office building. The kind of place you could pass 1,000 times and never notice. Inside, the woman from the phone was waiting. She introduced herself as Major Evelyn Shaw. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She gestured for me to sit, and on the conference table between us, she laid out my file. It was surprisingly thick. "We've read your reports, Knox," she said, her tone all business. "The official one and the unofficial one. The official report says you were undisciplined, a liability. The unofficial one, pieced together from field interviews with your squad, says you saved 3 lives." She leaned forward slightly. "We're not interested in the drama. We're interested in results. You delivered results under pressure, and you were punished for it. That makes you uniquely qualified for what we do." She pushed a heavy binder across the table. The cover was blank. "This is the Orion Division," she stated, her voice dropping. "Officially, we don't exist. You will hold no rank. You will earn no medals. You will receive no public recognition for your service. Your name, Taylor Knox, will be scrubbed from every federal database. You will, for all intents and purposes, become a ghost." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "In exchange, you will have a purpose. You will execute missions that no one else can, in places no one else can go. You will be a scalpel in the dark." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw something beyond professional detachment. It was a stark, brutal honesty. "We are not your family, Knox. We will not love you. But we will never, ever lie to you. A life without lies. That was the one thing my father, with all his power and prestige, could never offer me. I opened the binder and signed the contract without a moment's hesitation. The years that followed were a process of erasure and reconstruction. I learned how to die so that I could be reborn. My training wasn't in firearms or combat, the skills my father revered. It was in the subtle arts of influence and invisibility. I learned to analyze petabytes of metadata to predict a person's next move. I learned how to sit in a bustling food court at the Tyson's Corner Mall for 6 hours and remain completely unseen, a ghost in the machine. My instructors taught me how to build a credible alias, a new name, a new history, a new personality in 24 hours, and how to dismantle it just as quickly, leaving no trace. I learned to spot a foreign intelligence officer not by the weapon he carried, but by the precise way he held his espresso cup in a Georgetown cafe. I became an expert in the spaces between things, in the truths hidden in plain sight. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was an analyst, an observer, an invisible hand. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch my reflection in a darkened window and feel a jolt of dislocation. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her hair had changed color 6 times. Her eyes, once bright with the idealism of a West Point cadet, were now flat, analytical, and empty. I had lost Taylor Knox. She was a casualty, buried in an unmarked grave of lies and betrayals. But in her place, something else had grown. It was a quiet, cold strength, a power that didn't come from a rank on a uniform or a name etched in history books. It was the power of being underestimated, of being unseen. It was a power my father, with all the stars on his shoulders, could never possibly comprehend. Shaw said they would never lie to me. She also said they wouldn't love me. But after one particularly brutal mission in San Diego, she proved that some truths are more complex than they appear. She called me into her office and asked a question no one, not even my own father, had ever asked before. It was a question that would begin to change everything all over again. I had just returned from a mission in San Diego. It was a success, technically. I'd secured the encrypted hard drive we were after, but it had been messy. I'd made a tactical error in a warehouse down by the shipyards, an error that nearly cost me my life and left a searing, ugly scar across my shoulder. The pain was a dull, constant throb, a physical reminder of my imperfection. I was in the debriefing room, deep in the windowless vault that served as Orion's headquarters. The only light was the cold, artificial glow from the overhead fluorescent panels. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the server racks that lined the walls, the building's mechanical heartbeat. I handed my after-action report to Major Shaw, now Colonel Shaw, after a recent, unannounced promotion. The report was concise, factual, and omitted any mention of my own fear. I stood before her desk, my body rigid, my posture perfect. I was braced for the inevitable critique, the harsh, systematic breakdown of my mistake. This was the military way. It was my father's way. You perform, you are judged, you are found wanting. You do not show weakness, you do not make excuses. I steeled myself for the verdict, my focus entirely on controlling my breathing. The silence in the room stretched on, amplifying the hum of the machines. Colonel Shaw finished reading, her expression unreadable. She placed the report neatly on her desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge. She didn't look at it again. Instead, she lifted her gaze and looked directly at me. "The report is excellent, Knox. You accomplished the objective," she said. her voice its usual measured tone. She paused for a beat, and in that small silence, something shifted. Her voice, when she spoke again, was softer. "But I'm not asking about the mission. I'm asking about you. Are you okay?" The question hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was so unexpected, so entirely outside the parameters of our professional relationship, that my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. "Are you okay?" 3 simple words. In the 8 years since I'd left West Point, in my entire life before that, no one in a position of authority had ever asked me that question. My father had asked if I had followed orders. He had asked if I had upheld the family name. He had never once asked if I was okay. The question bypassed my intellect and struck something deep and buried, a part of me I thought had died long ago. A hot pressure built behind my eyes. To my horror, tears began to well up, spilling over and tracing hot tracks down my cold cheeks. They were the first tears I had shed in years, and once they started, I couldn't stop them. It was a silent, racking sob, a complete and humiliating loss of the control I had worked so hard to maintain. Evelyn didn't say a word. She didn't look away or show any sign of discomfort. She simply reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a box of tissues, and pushed it across the desk toward me. She waited, giving the silence the space it needed. When my sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she spoke again, her voice gentle. "General Knox was wrong, Taylor." It was the first time she had ever used my first name. "He taught you that strength is the absence of weakness, that to be vulnerable is to fail. But that's a lie we tell soldiers to make them effective. It's not a truth we should live by." She leaned forward, her gaze direct and kind. "Real strength isn't about never falling. It's about facing your own brokenness and having the courage to stand back up anyway." Her words resonated with an eerie familiarity. They were echoes of a voice I had been listening to secretly for months. On sleepless nights when the ghosts of my past were too loud, I'd listen to podcasts on my phone, the volume turned low, absorbing the teachings of a researcher named Brené Brown. She spoke about the power of vulnerability, about how courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to step forward into it. In that cold, windowless vault, a stranger, my commander, was giving me the validation my own family had denied me. She saw past the operative, past the asset, and saw the person. She saw the wound. That day, in the heart of that secret world, a seed of rebellion, a quiet determination to reclaim my own story, finally began to sprout. The quiet satisfaction I felt after leaving Colonel Shaw's office didn't last long. A few hours later, I was overseeing a data transfer in a secure mobile command unit parked near Fort Liberty when my encrypted phone buzzed. It was a scrambled number, a ghost from a past I had tried to bury. I knew instantly who it was. My thumb hovered over the screen, a flicker of the old hesitation, the old fear. I crushed it and answered the call, holding the phone to my ear without saying a word. Silence. Then his voice, familiar and yet horribly changed. It wasn't the calm, authoritative tone of General Harrison Knox. It was a low, guttural roar, vibrating with barely contained rage. "What the hell are you doing down there, Taylor?" The sound of my first name was a shock. He never used it unless he was furious. "Sergeant Major Thorne just called me to report that his men were ordered to salute you." "General Knox, ma'am? What kind of ridiculous charade are you playing? Are you actively trying to embarrass this family?" He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask what I was doing for a living. His only concern was how my actions, actions he couldn't even begin to comprehend, reflected on him. The rage, the accusations, it was all about his reputation. After all these years, I was still just a problem to be managed, a loose variable threatening his perfect equation of honor. I remained silent. My silence had always been a source of frustration for him. He saw it as defiance, as a failure to engage on his terms. As I listened to his breathing, heavy and ragged over the secure line, I realized my silence was no longer about fear. It was a strategy. Let him talk. Let him reveal himself. My lack of response seemed to fuel his fury. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, the words dripping with contempt. "A West Point dropout, and you have a command sergeant major saluting you? You are defiling the Knox name." The accusation was so predictable, so perfectly in character, that a cold, sharp clarity cut through me. The old pain, the sting of his disapproval, was gone. It had been replaced by something harder, something colder. "I'm just doing my job," I said, my voice level and detached. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was a sound of pure derision. "Your job? What's that? Working retail? Tending bar? Listen to me, Taylor. Whatever little game you're playing, it ends now. I don't know how you got that security clearance, but I will get to the bottom of this. I will find out what you're doing, and I will put a stop to it. Do not test me." And there it was, the final straw. He wasn't just indifferent to my life, he was actively hostile to it. He threatened to destroy whatever I had built for myself, not because it was wrong, but because it was unknown to him, beyond his control, and therefore a threat to his pristine public image. 8 years of silence, 8 years of swallowing my truth, of letting their narrative define me as a failure. 8 years of hoping that some part of him, some sliver of the father I once idolized, might still exist. All of it evaporated in that single venomous threat. The tremor in my hand wasn't from fear. It was from a pure, unadulterated rage that felt as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. The years of hurt had finally crystallized into something unbreakable. "You won't investigate anything, General," I said. My voice was quiet, even, but each word was honed to a razor's edge. "Because you don't have the clearance." I let that sink in, a statement of fact that completely upended the power dynamic he had relied on his entire life. "And you had better hope," I continued, savoring the shift from defense to offense, "that I never decide to use my clearance to investigate you." I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. My thumb pressed the button, severing the last toxic tie to my past. My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. The battle had begun. And every battle needs a weapon. My weapon had been dormant for years, hidden in plain sight, waiting in the hands of my own brother. After the call with my father, I didn't smash anything. I didn't scream. The rage was too cold, too pure for a messy release. It was a block of ice forming in my chest, solid and heavy. I walked calmly to the sterile bathroom of the mobile command unit and stared at my own reflection in the polished steel mirror. I saw the face of a woman who had perfected the art of suppression, a face that had become a mask of professional neutrality. But this time, something new stared back from my eyes. It wasn't pain, it was clarity, a terrifying, absolute clarity. For 8 years, I had allowed my silence to be interpreted as consent. I had let their version of my story stand unchallenged, a monument to their honor built on the rubble of my career. My father had just threatened to dismantle the new life I had painstakingly built, simply to protect his own image. He had made a grave miscalculation. He had awakened the one thing he thought he had successfully buried. The West Point cadet who believed in truth more than she believed in the chain of command. But now that cadet had access to tools he couldn't possibly imagine. Back at my terminal, my fingers moved with practiced speed across the keyboard. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the chilled, quiet air. I logged into the Orion archives, a labyrinth of encrypted data that held the secrets of the nation's shadow wars, and pulled up an old, dormant file. Its codename was innocuous, almost poetic, Project Nightingale. It was the name I had given the gift I presented to Caleb on the day he graduated from officer candidate school. To the outside world, it was a standard issue, olive drab field notebook, the kind every soldier carries, filled with waterproof paper for taking notes in the rain. But my gift had been modified. I remembered the day I gave it to him, standing on the sun-drenched parade ground. The faint pride in his eyes overshadowed by his eagerness to please our father, who stood nearby. Caleb had accepted it with a polite but dismissive air. "Thanks, sis," he'd said, flipping through the empty pages with a cursory glance. "But I think I'll stick with Dad's methods." At the time, his words were just a thoughtless slight, the casual preference of a son for his father. Now, listening to the memory echo in my mind, it felt like a bitter taunt, a reminder of a divide that had started long before the lies. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was what lay hidden inside. Laminated into the thick back cover, stitched so finely it was invisible to the naked eye, was a wafer-thin data disk made of spun steel. It wasn't just a storage device, it was a key, a digital tripwire. I had designed it myself in the early days of my Orion training. If that disk was ever connected to any unauthorized non-Orion network, like a personal laptop or a standard military tablet, it would silently ping my secure server, alerting me to its activation. I hadn't planted it as a trap, not then. I had put it there as a lifeline, a secret back door. It was a desperate, foolish hope that one day my brother, the boy I once built forts with in the backyard, might want to know the truth. That if he ever looked for it, a door would open. For 8 long years, that door had remained closed and locked. But my father's arrogant, threatening phone call had just handed me the leverage to change that. I knew my brother. I had to believe I still did. He was his father's son, disciplined, loyal, a follower of rules. But he also had our mother's innate curiosity, a quiet, persistent quality my father had tried and failed to stamp out. The strange events at Fort Liberty would be gnawing at him. The deferential salute from a command sergeant major, the base's official refusal to provide any information about me. The angry, evasive phone call from our father that would have surely followed. Caleb would be asking questions. And when a Special Forces officer starts asking questions, they don't stop until they get answers. They are trained to turn over every single stone. I wasn't going to give him the answer directly. That would be too easy for him to dismiss. He had to choose to walk through the door himself. He had to want to know. I composed a message. It was anonymous, sent through a series of encrypted relays across 3 continents that made it utterly untraceable. The recipient was one of Caleb's closest friends in his SF unit, a man known for his unwavering loyalty, but also his insatiable love of a good mystery. The message was a single, provocative line. "If you want to know who General Knox really is, ask about Lieutenant Miller's report, West Point, 2016. I hit send. The message vanished into the ether. I had done my part. I had planted a seed of doubt in the most fertile ground possible. The gossip-fueled, hyper-masculine environment of a close-knit military unit. The rumor would find its way to Caleb. His pride and his curiosity would do the rest. Have you ever had to trust that someone you love, someone who has disappointed you, will finally do the right thing when presented with the truth? That's the faith I was placing in my brother. I leaned back in my chair, the cold hum of the servers a steady rhythm in the quiet room. I had just aimed a weapon at the heart of my family's carefully constructed myth. Now all I had to do was wait for my brother to pull the trigger. I waited. For 3 days after I sent the message, there was only silence. A part of me, the cynical, scarred part, began to wonder if I had miscalculated. I wondered if my father's influence, a lifetime of carefully constructed mythology, was stronger than my brother's curiosity. I pictured Caleb dismissing the rumor, reaffirming his loyalty to the man who had given him everything. The thought left a familiar, bitter taste in my mouth. Then, on the 4th night, as I sat monitoring satellite feeds from a world away, a small, discreet alert chimed on my secure terminal. It was a single line of text against a black screen. Project Nightingale activated. My breath caught in my throat. He had found the key. The anonymous text message had arrived on Caleb's friend Dave's phone while they were grabbing a beer after a grueling week of training. Dave had shown it to him, his eyebrows raised. If you want to know who General Knox really is, ask about Lieutenant Miller's report, West Point, 2016. The message was like a grenade tossed into Caleb's brain. Lieutenant Miller? He vaguely remembered the name. He was Taylor's CO during the unfortunate incident that led to her departure. That's how his father had always phrased it. An unfortunate incident, a personal failing on her part. But the way that Command Sergeant Major Thorne had saluted her, that wasn't how you treated an unfortunate incident. That was respect, deep, unconditional respect. The pieces didn't fit. Caleb tried to pull up Taylor's official records, blocked. He tried to access the incident report from 2016, classified and sealed. The more walls he hit, the more the doubt grew, festering like an infection. His father's words when he asked about it were curt and final. "It's a closed chapter, son. Leave it be." That night, sleep was impossible. He tore through the old footlocker at the back of his closet, pulling out old uniforms and memories. At the bottom, he found it. The olive-drab field notebook Taylor had given him years ago. He'd never used it, always preferring the ones his father gave him, the ones he called the gold standard. But now as he held it, it felt different. It felt heavy, important. He ran his thumb over the stiff back cover and felt a subtle, unnatural ridge beneath the vinyl. His heart pounding, Caleb took out his pocket knife and carefully slit the seam. Inside, nested in a thin layer of foam, was a small steel-gray disc. It wasn't standard issue. He took it to his personal tablet, his hands unsteady. He plugged it in. The screen flickered, and then a stark, encrypted access portal appeared. There was no military seal, just the stylized logo of a horned owl, its eyes seeming to watch him from the screen. Below it were 2 words, Orion Division. He had no idea what Orion was, but his instincts screamed that it was a world away from a regular Army captain's clearance level. There was only one accessible file, a scanned PDF. It was Lieutenant Miller's original after-action report. Dated the day after the incident, Caleb read it, his world tilting on its axis. He read how Cadet Knox had correctly identified a critical navigational error, how she had defied an incorrect order to save her squad from walking into a live fire zone. He read Miller's own words, praising her, superior reflexes, and decisive action under extreme duress. He had recommended her for a commendation. Then a second document loaded beside the first. It was the official report, the one his father had shown him years ago. It was a complete fabrication detailing her supposed panic and recklessness. Two versions of history. One was the truth, the other was a lie, and his father's signature was on both. An encrypted message soon appeared on Caleb's tablet. It was a set of coordinates for a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Fayetteville, and a time, ISO 300. I was there 20 minutes early, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth in the back corner, nursing a cup of black coffee. The place smelled of stale grease and disinfectant. He arrived exactly on time. Caleb slid into the booth opposite me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and confusion. He looked broken. He didn't greet me. He just placed his tablet on the sticky tabletop, the screen still glowing with the two conflicting reports. "What is this, Taylor?" he asked, his voice a harsh whisper, trembling with the effort of keeping it low. "What the hell is this?" I looked at him, my brother, the golden boy whose path had always been so straight and clear. Now, for the first time, he was lost. I didn't answer his question. I didn't need to. He already had the answer. I just held his gaze, my own expression unreadable. "That's the choice, Caleb," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's always been the choice, between Dad's legacy and the truth." I let the words hang in the air between us, heavy and sharp. "You've spent your whole life living by the first one. Now the question is, do you want to know the second?" He stared at me, his jaw working silently. The entire foundation of his world, the bedrock of his identity, had just been shattered. For the first time in his perfect gilded life, my brother didn't know how to answer. Caleb had made his choice. We didn't take this to a military court. A court-martial would have been a public spectacle, a circus for the media. I had arranged for something else, something quieter, colder, and far more terrifying for a man like my father. It was officially called a procedural integrity hearing before the Federal Security Review Board. Unofficially, it was a trial in the heart of the shadow government. The hearing room was located in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, deep underground in an annex building in Washington, D.C. No windows, soundproof walls, and a single, heavy steel door. It was a place where careers and legends came to die in silence. My father, retired General Harrison Knox, was summoned. He walked in with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed the system was built to protect him. He saw this as a bureaucratic misunderstanding, a minor annoyance he could extinguish with his reputation and a few well-placed calls. His dress uniform was immaculate, the rows of ribbons on his chest a testament to a lifetime of celebrated victories. He sat at the table opposite us, Caleb and me. The look he gave us was not one of anger, but of profound paternal disappointment, as if we were the ones who had betrayed him. What he didn't know was that this wasn't his stage. 3 of the 5 board members seated at the head of the table were senior Orion officers, including Colonel Shaw. They were not generals or politicians. They were analysts, cryptographers, and strategists, people who answered not to a chain of command, but to the cold, hard logic of verifiable data. The hearing began. I remained seated, my voice calm and dispassionate, as I was prompted to present the evidence. I felt like an automaton, simply executing a program. One by one, the exhibits were displayed on the monitors in the room. First, Lieutenant Miller's original, glowing report of my actions at West Point. Second, the falsified report that had ended my career. Third, the digital access logs from the West Point servers, showing a login and file modification from an IP address traced to our family home under the user ID Harrison Knox. 4.2. And finally, the audio file. My father's voice filled the silent room, a recording of the threatening phone call from a few weeks prior. I will find out what you're doing, and I will put a stop to it. Do not test me. The lead panel member, a stern-faced man I knew only as the chairman, turned to my father. General Knox, do you dispute the authenticity of this evidence? My father's confidence had begun to fray at the edges, but he held his ground. He cleared his throat. I do not dispute that I amended the report, he admitted, his voice steady. He sat up straighter, attempting to reclaim his authority. He looked not at the board, but at the military officers in the room, his peers. I did what any leader would have done, he declared, his tone shifting into the one he used for speeches. I made a difficult command decision to protect the integrity of the chain of command and the honor of a young, promising officer. There are times when the truth must be managed for the greater good. It was a necessary sacrifice. A necessary sacrifice. The words hung in the sterile air, obscene in their self-serving piety. He was trying to frame the destruction of his own daughter's future as a noble, strategic act. The room was utterly silent. I could feel Caleb vibrating with a rage so intense it was almost a physical force beside me. That's when my brother stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a jarring, ugly sound in the stillness. All eyes turned to him. His voice, when he spoke, trembled with emotion, but it was clear and strong. A necessary sacrifice? Caleb's voice cracked. The only sacrifice made in that room 8 years ago was my sister's. She sacrificed her career, her future, her dream, all for telling the truth. You, he said, his voice dropping as he pointed a shaking finger at our father. You, General, sacrificed your daughter for a lie. He sat down, his part said. The silence returned, heavier this time. Then I spoke. It was the only time I would speak for myself during the entire hearing. My voice was quiet, sharp, and carried to every corner of the room. You taught us that honor is everything, sir, I said, addressing my father directly. It seems your definition of honor doesn't include the truth. The chairman did not deliberate. The verdict had already been decided. He looked at my father, his face an impassive mask. General Harrison Knox, this board finds that you knowingly and willfully falsified a United States Military Academy official report, and subsequently used your position to intimidate a federal operative. Effective immediately, this board recommends to the Department of the Army that you be stripped of all post-retirement honorary titles. Your security clearance is permanently revoked. He then turned his gaze to me. The original findings regarding Cadet Taylor Knox are to be expunged. Her record is to be restored and sealed at the highest level of classification, effective immediately. This hearing is concluded. It was over. My father just sat there, his mouth slightly agape. The color had drained from his face, leaving behind a gray, waxy pallor. The Titan, the legend, the man who had commanded armies and shaped history, looked, for the first time in his life, utterly small. He had been defeated, not by an enemy army, but by a truth he had tried to bury, brought to light by the children he had scorned and betrayed. The verdict was delivered. The case was closed. As the heavy door of the hearing room clicked shut behind us, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. We had won, but I knew the real war, The one inside our family had only just begun. Caleb and I walked out of the sterile government building and into the humid afternoon air of Washington, D.C., without saying a word. The sky was a uniform leaden gray, a perfect mirror of our shared mood. There was no triumphant feeling of victory, no cathartic release that I had perhaps foolishly imagined. The adrenaline from the hearing had evaporated, leaving behind only a profound, hollow exhaustion. We had won. We had unearthed the truth and held our father accountable in a form he could not control. But in doing so, we had also lost him completely. We had lost the idea of him, the grand, heroic illusion of family that we had clung to in different ways for our entire lives. We drove back to my small, sparsely furnished apartment in Arlington in a heavy silence. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. It was the vast, empty space left behind after a detonation, a space to process the seismic shift that had just permanently altered the landscape of our lives. We had brought down a titan, but in his fall, the entire structure of our world had come down with him. That evening, as I sat staring at the city lights through my window, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I knew by heart but hadn't saved, our mother. My hand hesitated. Then I answered, my heart a cold stone in my chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or rage, which somehow would have been easier to bear. Her voice was flat, brittle with a grief that had curdled into blame. It was the voice of a woman choosing a side. "You've destroyed him," she said, without any preamble. "After everything he did for this country, for this family, you've destroyed it all." The accusation was so predictable, so perfectly aligned with her lifetime of enabling his myth, that it didn't even sting. It just made me tired, a soul-deep weariness that settled into my bones. "No, Mom," I replied, my own voice quiet and steady. "This family was destroyed a long time ago. We just turned on the lights." I ended the call before she could respond, a deep, sorrowful certainty settling over me. That was likely the last time I would ever speak to her. The final door had closed. A few days later, Caleb showed up at my door. He was in civilian clothes, a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and he looked younger, less burdened than I'd seen him in years. He walked in, his eyes scanning my small living room, and without a word, he placed his captain's bars on my small kitchen table. The polished silver gleamed under the overhead light, looking entirely out of place amongst my coffee mugs. "I put in for a transfer," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm leaving Special Forces, moving to a systems integration unit at the Pentagon. It's a desk job." I stared at him, stunned into silence. This was his dream, the culmination of his entire existence. "Why, Caleb? You've worked your entire life for that. You earned it." He shook his head, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips. He looked down at the insignia on the table as if it were a relic from another life. "I can't wear this anymore, Taylor, not without thinking about what it cost you. Not without knowing it was part of a legacy our father built on a lie." He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw not the golden boy, but the man he was becoming, a man of principle. "I want to build my own legacy, one based on the truth from the ground up." He pushed the silver bars across the table toward me. "These belong to you. You're the one who embodied the code." A wave of emotion, grief, love, an overwhelming sense of gratitude threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it down. I pushed the insignia back toward him. "No, Caleb, they don't belong to anyone. They're just pieces of metal. The real value, the real honor, is in the person who wears them. And that's you." we sat there in a comfortable silence. The unspoken truths of our past finally settled between us. The silence wasn't empty or awkward, it was full of understanding. In the wreckage of our old family, we had found the foundations for a new one. We were a unit of two now, a found family forged in a painful shared truth. I knew in that moment what our future would look like. Holidays would be quiet, just the two of us, maybe with a takeout pizza and a rented movie instead of a grand formal dinner. There would be no more dutiful phone calls to our parents. The family home in Fayetteville was a foreign country we would never visit again. And yet, looking at my brother, a profound sense of peace washed over me. It was a stark, lonely peace, but it was real. It was ours. We had drawn a line in the sand with fire, and for the first time in our lives, we were both standing on the safe side of it, the side where the truth lived. 6 months later, the sharp edges of the past had begun to soften. Caleb settled into his new desk job at the Pentagon, working in the same sprawling complex as me, though in a different, unclassified world. Once or twice a week, we'd meet for lunch, grabbing gyros or tacos from one of the food trucks that lined the streets nearby. We talked about normal things, a movie he wanted to see, a frustrating bug in a software update, the perpetually disappointing Washington Commanders football team. We never talked about our parents. We didn't need to. Their absence had become a quiet, normal part of our new reality, a silence that was peaceful rather than heavy. One sunny afternoon, as we were finishing our lunch, Caleb reached into his pocket and placed a small, simple silver pin on the table between us. It was a solid, unadorned shield with no words or rank inscribed on it. "I had this made," he said, his voice quiet. "It's not a rank, it's our unit insignia, the Knox unit." I picked it up. It was heavy in my palm, solid and real. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so unfamiliar it took me a moment to recognize it as joy. I pinned it to the inside of my jacket, a secret emblem of our new allegiance. A week later, I was preparing for a new mission, a long-term assignment overseas. Before I left, I took a walk to the National Mall. I found myself drawn to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, a place I hadn't visited in years. I walked along the polished black granite wall, my fingers tracing the thousands of names etched into its surface. Each name was a story, a sacrifice, a legacy. My father had always been obsessed with legacy, but his was a hollow monument built on sand, an image polished to a high shine to hide the emptiness within. Staring at that wall, at the quiet dignity of those names, I finally understood. A true legacy isn't what people say about you when you're alive. It isn't about titles or honors or the stories you tell about yourself. A legacy is the sum of your quiet actions, the right choices you make when no one is watching. It's the truth you leave behind for others to build on. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you create. My flight out was on a C-130 transport plane from Andrews Air Force Base. There was no one there to see me off, no tearful goodbyes. It was just me and a handful of other quiet professionals, heading toward our next assignment. As the plane lumbered into the air, I looked down at the sprawling landscape of America shrinking below. The anger I had carried for so long was gone. The deep, aching pain was gone. In their place was a profound stillness. I thought of Caleb, starting his new life, building a legacy of his own. I thought of Colonel Shaw, the woman who had asked if I was okay, and in doing so, had given me permission to heal. I reached inside my jacket and felt the cool, solid weight of the silver pin. They were my family now. They were my legacy. They say that to fly is to be free. But for me, this was something more. It was peace. The kind of peace you can't be given, the kind you have to fight for tooth and nail. The sky before me was vast and open, a clean slate. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was flying toward myself. That day, high above the clouds, I realized my story wasn't about the family I'd lost, but about the one I had built, with Caleb, with Colonel Shaw, with myself. It was a story of finding my own truth. And maybe you have a story like that, too. A moment where you had to choose your own path, a time you had to redefine what family and honor mean to you. If my journey has resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel. Your story matters, and by joining us, you help us share more tales of resilience and hope. Thank you for listening.